It'd be great to hear about how to manage estranged family member relationships.
Hi, Kim. My boyfriend and I are trying to set boundaries in our relationship to avoid microviolence or disrespect towards each other.
I have always struggled with people pleasing, and I've consciously tried to work on it by setting stronger boundaries. I still feel guilty when I do that.
Hello, and welcome to Engineering Love. I'm Kim Pollander, and I help you engineer a stronger relationship by troubleshooting conflict and communication. Today, let's talk about boundaries. Every people pleaser's worst nightmare. I think everyone can agree that you should set healthy boundaries, but we rarely talk about what that means in specifics. What does that look like for you? Whenever we talk about changing a behavior that you don't like, it is essential to first understand why that behavior is there in the first place. There's a method to your madness. You're not an idiot. The number one job of the subconscious is to protect you. So understand whatever this behavior is, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's anger, whether it's anxiety, or whether it's not setting boundaries. Understand how that behavior serves you well. So how do you benefit from not setting boundaries? Well, you keep the peace, you don't cause conflict, don't cause drama, you agree to what the other person says so they must like you more, accept you more, approve of you, you don't get rejected or abandoned. So as you can see, there are many reasons why a person may not set boundaries. It serves you really well. Now, in order for a new behavior to come in and replace this old behavior, that new behavior has to have more value than the old behavior to push it out. So if we're talking about you moving from not setting boundaries to all of a sudden setting boundaries, your perception, your experience of setting boundaries has to outweigh all of the benefits that we just talked about of not setting boundaries. And this is where cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, can help in reframing how you perceive setting boundaries. Other beliefs that might fuel this is that you might have negative beliefs about yourself, that you're not important enough to have boundaries. Like I said, if you set boundaries, people are going to reject you. You might have judgments on yourself if you set boundaries, like you are suddenly selfish or being a winch. And if you've been not setting boundaries for quite some time, then this is pretty set. You've been conditioned. It's habitual, where, older habits are a little bit harder to break, but it's going to take a little bit of extra effort to seed the new behavior. Also, some people feel really guilty for setting boundaries. Maybe you had some negative experiences setting boundaries, such as incurring the wrath of a parent. Maybe you were intensely criticized or mistreated when you tried to stand up for yourself. So now you've grown up doubting yourself, not tuning into your own judgment, and not standing up for yourself. Setting boundaries comes down to assertiveness, the ability to be assertive, stand up for yourself, and stand up to others. Ask for what you need. Now, assertiveness skills by themselves are something that you can learn. You can take classes on, look up YouTube videos, you can practice. But ultimately, if you have these deeper beliefs, or any sort of schema, as they call it, core beliefs, about who you are, if you set boundaries, such as being that selfish person, such as not being good enough or worthy enough to set boundaries, then all of the assertiveness training in the world will not make that much of a dent when it comes to changing your behavior. Knowing when to set boundaries is dependent on what you need for yourself, and many people just naturally are not tuned into what they need. Because again, they're not practiced in doing it. They are not in touch with who they are and what they desire and what they need and want. So the first order of business, whenever it comes to a situation where there's an opportunity for boundaries to be drawn, is to figure out first, what do you want? What do you need? A good litmus for people pleasers is that whenever somebody asks you to do something, ask yourself, if I do this, will I be resentful? If the answer is yes, if you will be resentful by agreeing to help that person move, by agreeing to run that errand when you don't have time, and then you agree to do it and you become resentful, now you've invited this negative energy into your friendship. You've seeded resentment. And over time, if these acts of service, we'll call them, are not reciprocated, that resentment will grow and grow. Once you start to practice and tune in to what you desire in any given situation, then it's a matter of actually communicating to the person what you desire. That may not be in line with what they want from you. So when we're talking about boundaries, the first step is tuning in and figuring out what you want. What do you need in the situation? Is it a situation where you can compromise or actually go ahead and do what the other person wants? If so, check in with yourself. If you do it, will it create resentment? If not, go ahead and do it. If it will create resentment, then you should find a way to communicate that you can't do it. If not, you're just going to invite resentment into that friendship. And when you tack on a bunch of incidents like this, where you're constantly doing things and not asking for things, where it's not automatically being reciprocated to you, now we have a life of a lot of bitterness and sadness, and a lot of times depression. So let's see how boundaries apply to today's questions.
It'd be great to hear about how to manage estranged family member relationships as a person who maintains relationships with both of the estranged parties who do not communicate with one another.
Thank you for submitting this question. This sounds like a very difficult, challenging, complicated situation. I'm not sure how you got into the middle of it, but clearly both parties who are warring with each other trust you to some degree. A lot of times, family members who have a middle person running messages back and forth, a lot of times these battling family members are kind of wanting to communicate with the other person. They just can't do it directly. So they choose some middle person, some mediator to take messages back and forth. Because whenever you have a situation where a person is a confidant for two people who are just hating on each other, those two people who are hating on each other generally always know that there's a shared confidant. So it's this little dance that everybody does of the silent treatment and passive-aggressive communication. So to the person who asked this question, first figure out, what do you want in this situation? And what are your limits of being that go-between? Do you even have any limits? Examples of limits would be when you talk to each person, letting them know from now on, I'm not going to talk about enemy number one. I'll talk to you about anything else, but I will not talk about enemy number one. Make it very clear with them what your boundaries are, and then stick to it. It takes two people. It takes both parties to ignore boundaries. And how much are you being a willing participant in having your boundaries being violated? If these enemies are asking you to relay messages in between, what do you want to do? Are you willing to do this? Great. If not, let them know. Hey, I'm not comfortable doing this. If you want to communicate that to so-and-so, you're going to have to tell them yourself or find another way to tell them. A better question would be, what benefit are you getting from being the middle person, being between these two parties? Is there any sort of self-importance, any sort of added value to you for being the go-between? Asked another way, if you were to stop being the middle person and stop doing that role and just have an individual relationship with each of them, what would your value be to them? Do you have some subconscious belief that this is your primary value to these people, of being this middle person, of being the person that they vent to? Whereas if you took that off the plate, took that away from them, would they still want to talk to you? Would they still value you as much? Something else you might want to explore is your relationship with each of these people. Do you have any of your own resentment or unfinished business that needs to be addressed with either party? Sure, they're going off about so-and-so, enemy number one, to you, but do you have any issues with this person that you feel frustrated about that you would like to bring up with them? Any ways that this person has ignored your needs in the past? How they've always pushed their own agenda on you, how you've never been able to stand up to them. What's the history for you with both of these people? Because that could be contributing to some degree to your amount of frustration and resentment in this whole situation. It is not your job to save people or repair relationships. Every person, every adult person, has accountability for reconciling and repairing relationships and moving forward, forgiving or not forgiving. And if they're choosing to stick their head in the sand, to fold their arms and not move toward any negotiation or reconciliation, then they've made their choice. It is not your job to fix it. And the more that you try to fix it, the more you will ruin that relationship. Them putting you in the middle has already started to degrade your relationship with them. And you getting more sucked into it will put the nail in the coffin for that relationship. This is something for a mediator to handle, something for a therapist to handle, not something for you, a family member or friend. But it's not your job to fix this relationship. If you feel that it is, what guilt are you carrying? What needs to be resolved for you in that? Where you're trying to find some redemption, perhaps? I don't know. So I would figure out what you want from each of these people, practice some assertiveness, practice what you want to say, how you want to phrase it, maybe write it down, and then find a way to communicate that to each of them. Once you communicate that line in the sand, that place you won't go with them, then keep enforcing that. This is a really difficult situation, and I'm sure there's a lot of resentment and bitterness and things that have gone down between these people, and it sounds like you are hoping that they reconcile, but ultimately that's going to be up to them. And I encourage you to find the boundaries that you need to draw so that you don't go down that road of bitterness with them. Thank you very much for your question.
Hi, Kim. My boyfriend and I are trying to set boundaries in our relationship to avoid microviolence or disrespect towards each other, but we're having a hard time finding a way to set the following action if we start getting closer to break those boundaries.
Thank you for this question. It sounds like you and your boyfriend have put a lot of work and effort into trying to establish the rules of engagement, so to speak. Establishing what the boundaries are, what the rules are, and trying to stick to them. It sounds like you also trigger each other a lot, which is not uncommon, but instead of focusing on the boundaries and those lines in the sand that each of you are supposed to follow and focusing on the rules, I would focus on what your triggers are with each other. What is it about that other person that knows which buttons to push that sends you from 0 to 60 in a matter of seconds, and vice versa? When it comes to couples and conflict resolution, it is essential to understand what your deepest triggers are. This is generally going to be a pattern that has followed you in your life, a consistent series of events, a consistent trigger that really upsets you in the shortest amount of time. Since there weren't specifics in the question about what sets you off, what motivates the microviolence, then for each of you, look at what it is about the other person that upsets you so much. If we go back to that projections and transference work, if you take the other person sitting in front of you and say, what is their biggest crime? What is their biggest fault? Just unedited. What is it about them that is so annoying? And for whatever your answer is, first ask yourself, okay, is this something that I'm also guilty of? If so, then that's a projection. But I have a feeling of what's going on is actually transference, where whatever this person is doing, it's reminding you of a time from your past where you were treated similarly by someone. Perhaps your boyfriend is accusing you of things, or your boyfriend doesn't listen to you, or your boyfriend is ignoring you, or your boyfriend doesn't listen to your needs. Whatever it is, look back on your life, typically back in childhood, and who was that person from your past who also made you feel this way? When it comes to microviolence in general, how did you see that modeled growing up? Was it something that played out between your parents, between siblings? Something that you directly experienced or something that you saw being experienced? When did it become so normal to communicate like this, to treat other people like this? Once you understand what your deepest triggers are and how that's playing out in all of your arguments, and communicate that to your partner, to your boyfriend, it will set the stage for more empathy to be introduced into your dynamic. Where once you understand how your partner is feeling, you put yourself in their shoes, think back to their childhood, what they just shared with you about their deepest triggers and where that comes from. Then you can say, oh, okay. If I were in your shoes, if I had your childhood and your struggles, yes, I can totally see why what I just said was totally triggering and upsetting. It allows for you to have more understanding of yourself and patience for yourself, and for your partner to more easily understand and empathize with you. Also, the way that you described the conflict, where if you start getting closer to breaking the boundaries with each other, then you both start getting ready for war, is how I imagine it. To me, that says that there's some stuff from your past that still needs to be processed. Some pain, some trauma, some abandonment, neglect, abuse, whatever the case may be. Something that's still very, very raw. Where over your dead body will you allow your boyfriend or your girlfriend to even go there with you? What is so raw from your past that is creating this volatility in your current relationship? At the root of it, it sounds like both of you could learn and benefit from empathy exercises, reflective listening, demonstrating more understanding of your partner. Research has shown that empathy is one of the most important aspects when it comes to a therapeutic relationship between a therapist and a client, and it holds true for couples relationships as well. Empathy is key. Thank you very much for your question, and I wish you the best in your exploration of those triggers.
Hi, Kim. I have always struggled with people pleasing. I didn't even really know I was doing it until a couple of years ago, and I've consciously tried to work on it by setting stronger boundaries and just sticking to them. But nevertheless, I still feel guilty when I do that. And so I would just love to hear what you have to say to someone like me who is always really trying to make sure that everyone else is around her is happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this question and sharing a little bit of your personal experience and reactions to trying to set stronger boundaries. I think this is a common feeling and a common experience for many people, so this question is just super relatable. In my last episode, I talked about people pleasing a lot, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of what I said, but let's start applying that to boundaries and setting boundaries. When you say that you feel guilty when setting stronger boundaries, to me, this is based upon the premise that the people in your life are flaky. That the people in your life don't want you to be happy, don't care if you struggle, could care less about your feelings, and ultimately don't love you, or at least don't love you very deeply. If you are a people pleaser trying to set boundaries, understand that other people might be upset when they don't get their way. That other people might not be happy when you can't do something for them and they really want you to do something for them. You'll have to start getting comfortable with people being displeased, not mad or angry or resentful towards you, but just getting comfortable with people being disappointed. This is a very normal reaction. It's reasonable for them to be disappointed, and allow them to have that space to do so. If you are a people pleaser and feel guilty about drawing stronger boundaries, ask yourself, does that friend always want to get their way and never your way? Does that friend not care about your desires? Is that friend like a dictator where they just want you to do everything they say? Obviously, or at least I'm assuming, if you're with a good person for a friend, the answer to these questions is no, your friend does not feel that way. You may think that's a ridiculous exercise to walk through, but it's important to really call out the internal dialogue that we deal with every day. When we start to voice our inner dialogue, voice our beliefs, which have a ton of irrational logic in them, we start to call ourselves out on the deep beliefs and premises of which we operate every single day. And when you call out the irrational logic, then there's room and space to insert more reasonable logic, such as my friend isn't a dictator, my friend cares about my feelings. If my energy is completely tapped and I can't do this task for them, even though I want to, that they will understand. That my friend is actually loving and supportive. How about that? The inability to set boundaries is a fear of rejection. And when you have a fear of rejection based on just setting a boundary, like saying no once in a while, then that fear of rejection is really irrational, based on irrational logic that probably got seeded, most definitely got seeded when you were younger. Situations of abandonment or neglect or loss of a person in your life can oftentimes lead to a life of people-pleasing and the inability to draw boundaries. Why? Because every time you draw a boundary or feel you're going to disappoint someone, you're going to experience this fear that, oh no, I'm now going to turn this person away. I'm going to suddenly be too much for this person and they're just going to one day be gone from my life for no good reason, which is what a lot of types of abandonment are when it comes to adoption or losing a parent when you're young, or divorce and one parent leaves the picture completely. When you're a child, things don't make sense. Why did this person leave so suddenly? And then children start to insert their irrational logic, and then that irrational logic gets seeded and carried into adulthood. Where now, if you suddenly tell someone, oh, I'm sorry, I'm tapped, I am busy, I have this or that going on, I can't help you move, suddenly saying that will put you at risk for complete and total abandonment and rejection. To heal from this, the goal is to start surrounding yourself with people with depth and integrity who have your back, who will not reject you, not abandon you, and who exhibit true loyalty and faith in you. When you're surrounded by those people, then you can better exercise drawing boundaries, standing up for yourself, expressing your needs. Then you can constantly remind yourself that when you're triggered into situations where you're scared to draw boundaries, where you feel guilty in drawing boundaries, you can then remind yourself, hey, wait a minute, I'm no longer in my childhood. I'm no longer that child who was neglected or abandoned or rejected. I'm here in my adult life and I'm surrounded by people who love me. And it's that constant reminding of yourself to pull yourself out of that trance of being pulled into your childhood, falling into those childhood situations, those childhood memories, and to keep processing those memories of pain and loss and abandonment, but to be able to really sit in the present moment and appreciate and have gratitude for the love that you're surrounded with. Because when we're trying to heal from loss, early loss in life, sometimes we get into this mode of rejecting all of the evidence pouring in, not noticing all of the evidence pouring in, where we're not letting those acts of kindness, those loving gestures, those supportive words, the understanding when we draw a boundary. We're not letting all these pieces of evidence come in and integrate with us to build up that bank balance, to start pushing out the old memories and reconditioning ourselves towards new ways of relating to people. And if you don't allow that process to happen and don't catch yourself and call yourself out on that, you will go your whole life missing all of the ways that people love and support you and sticking to this narrative that if I draw boundaries, others will just flat out reject me. So understand that if you are a people pleaser, it will be radically uncomfortable for you to draw boundaries at first until you get practiced in it, until you get more evidence that the people you're drawing boundaries with will still accept and love you. And once you get more evidence, then it will become easier. Then it will become less of an anxiety attack when you actually try to do this. And then you will actually start to learn to receive love in a genuine way rather than an obligatory way. Thank you very much for your question. I encourage you to push through that guilt and set those boundaries and set people up for success. Allow your friends to support you. Give them the opportunity to support you and prove you wrong. Prove to you that there are people out there who want to love and support you, even if you don't always agree with what they want to do. Thank you very much for your question. Thank you very much for listening to another episode of Engineering Love. And if you like this episode or like the show, please like and share and subscribe and whatever you do. And before I go, I'd like to leave you with this quote from the Dalai Lama, who said, "Do not let the behavior of others destroy your inner peace." And for what we were talking about today and drawing boundaries, find what you need to do to bring some inner peace to you. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again next week.